What if the gods of ancient Mesopotamia weren't gods at all? What if the stories carved into clay tablets thousands of years ago weren't myths, but eyewitness accounts of beings from another world? The Anunnaki, mysterious figures described as powerful rulers, creators of humanity, and bringers of knowledge. For some, they are the foundation of ancient myth. For others, they are evidence of alien visitors who shaped our destiny. In this deep dive, we will uncover the truth, from the earliest Sumerian records to modern-day theories, exploring whether the Anunnaki were divine figures, clever metaphors, or beings not of this earth. Prepare to journey through history, archaeology, and forbidden theories as we separate myth from mystery in the Anunnaki. Gods of myth or alien gods? The origins of the Anunnaki. When we talk about the great mysteries of the ancient world, the Anunnaki always stand out as one of the most fascinating and puzzling topics. The word itself carries a sense of something both divine and mysterious, but also strangely otherworldly. Were they gods worshipped by ancient civilizations? Or could they have been beings from another world, remembered as alien gods by early humans? To begin unraveling this mystery, we must go back to the very roots of civilization itself, ancient Mesopotamia. The Anunnaki first appear in the myths and records of the Sumerians, one of the earliest known civilizations in human history. Around 400 to 2000 BCE, the Sumerians lived in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is today Iraq and parts of Syria. They gave us some of the first writing systems, built advanced cities, and laid the foundations for law, astronomy, mathematics, and religion. But in their myths, carved into clay tablets using cuneiform writing, they also left behind descriptions of powerful beings, the Anunnaki. The name Anunnaki is thought to mean those who from heaven came to earth, or offspring of Anu, depending on how it is translated. Anu was the sky god, the supreme deity in Sumerian mythology, and the Anunnaki were believed to be his children or followers. These beings were often associated with great power, judgment, and control over human destiny. They were said to decide the fates of men, to bless or punish, and to shape the course of human history. But even within the Sumerian texts, the role of the Anunnaki is not always clear. In some myths, they appear as gods who govern the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. In others, they take on the role of judges of the dead. Their number varies too. Sometimes they are a small council of 7 gods. Other times they are described as a group of 50 or more. This shifting role and mysterious identity has only fueled speculation in modern times. The Sumerians were followed by other Mesopotamian civilizations, the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Each of these cultures adopted and reshaped the myths of the Anunnaki. Over centuries, the stories of these gods spread and evolved. By the time of Babylon, figures like Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, and Inanna were among the key deities linked with the Anunnaki. They became connected with themes of creation, kingship, fertility, and judgment. One of the most famous Mesopotamian myths involving the Anunnaki is the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this ancient story, Gilgamesh, the great king of Uruk, is described as being part divine himself, with connections to these gods. The Anunnaki are mentioned as judges of the underworld, watching over the balance of life and death. This shows how deeply their presence was embedded into the worldview of these ancient people. But here is where things get even more intriguing. The descriptions of the Anunnaki are not always purely spiritual. In some myths, they appear almost human-like, yet greater in power and wisdom. They come down from the heavens, teach humanity skills and knowledge, and sometimes even interact directly with humans. This has led some modern researchers and alternative theorists to ask, what if the Anunnaki were not simply gods of myth, but beings of flesh and blood, visitors from beyond the earth? The key spark for this theory came from the 20th century, when ancient Mesopotamian texts were being translated and studied more deeply. Scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer brought these ancient myths to light, and soon they captured the imagination of people around the world. Later, in the 1970s, a writer named Zecharia Sitchin put forward a controversial theory in his book, The 12th Planet. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki were not just gods in a symbolic sense, but alien visitors from a distant planet called Nibiru. Sitchin suggested that these beings came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago, seeking resources, especially gold, which they needed for their own survival. According to him, the Anunnaki genetically engineered early humans, possibly Homo sapiens, to work as laborers in their mines. He argued that many of the myths and stories in Mesopotamian tablets were not allegories, but actual historical accounts, memories of contact with extraterrestrial beings. This idea captured the attention of millions and gave birth to the modern ancient astronaut theory. According to this view, the gods worshipped by ancient civilizations all around the world might have been misunderstood visitors from the stars. The pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and other megalithic structures were seen as evidence of advanced technology beyond the capacity of humans at that time. And at the heart of this theory, the Anunnaki stood as the most striking example of alien gods remembered as myth. Mainstream historians and archaeologists, however, strongly disagree with Sitchin's claims. They argue that his translations of Sumerian texts were inaccurate, and that the myths of the Anunnaki were always meant to be symbolic, not literal history. For them, the Anunnaki are part of a complex spiritual worldview, representing forces of nature, divine justice, and the relationship between humans and the cosmos. The stories, they say, should be understood in the cultural and religious context of ancient Mesopotamia, not as evidence of aliens mining gold on Earth. Yet despite these criticisms, the mystery remains compelling. Why did the Sumerians describe their gods as coming from the heavens? Why do so many myths across the world, from the sky gods of the Greeks to the feathered serpent of the Mayans, speak of powerful beings descending from above, teaching humans, and then departing? Were these simply archetypal stories born from human imagination? Or do they point to something real, something that lies hidden behind the veil of myth? The origins of the Anunnaki then leave us with more questions than answers. On one hand, we have the historical and religious interpretation, the Anunnaki as ancient gods who embodied the beliefs of early Mesopotamian culture. On the other hand, we have the alternative, radical interpretation, the Anunnaki as ancient aliens remembered by humanity as divine beings. The truth may lie somewhere between. Perhaps the myths were inspired by real encounters with powerful individuals or events that seemed godlike to early people. Or perhaps they were purely symbolic. Yet later generations reinterpreted them through the lens of mystery and wonder. What is clear is that the story of the Anunnaki has survived for thousands of years, refusing to fade, and still igniting curiosity in our modern world. In this first part, we have seen where the Anunnaki come from, the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. We have explored their place in myth, their role as divine judges and creators, and the rise of modern theories that challenge traditional history. But this is only the beginning. To truly uncover the Anunnaki mystery, we must dive deeper into the myths of creation, the tales of Enki and Enlil, the connections to kingship and power, and the ongoing debate between myth and alien theory. The journey into the mystery has only just begun. The Anunnaki and the creation of humanity. If the Anunnaki were truly gods of the Sumerians, then it is no surprise that their myths often dealt with one of the greatest questions of all: how humanity itself came into existence. In the cuneiform tablets left behind, the stories of creation are told not once, but in several different versions, each giving us fragments of a larger puzzle. And as we look closely, we begin to see why the Anunnaki have fascinated researchers, historians, and theorists for so long. The Sumerian myth known as the Enuma Elish, which later influenced Babylonian tradition, tells us about the birth of the world and the role of the gods. At the beginning, there was chaos, an endless sea, from which the heavens and earth were divided. The gods, including the Anunnaki, emerged from this act of creation. But while the cosmos had been shaped, there was still the matter of work, of labor, of maintaining the order of the world. And here lies the turning point. The gods themselves did not want to perform endless toil. One of the earliest texts, the Atrahasis epic, describes how the younger gods were burdened with heavy work, digging canals, maintaining rivers, and managing the needs of the earth. After many years, they rebelled. In their anger, they confronted Enlil, the great chief of the gods, demanding a solution. It was then that a radical decision was made. Humanity would be created to take over the labor of the gods. The method of this creation is described in symbolic and sometimes unsettling terms. The goddess Ninhursag, also known as Ninti, played a vital role. According to the story, clay was mixed with the flesh and blood of a slain god, and from this mixture mankind was shaped. Humanity, then, was born as both earthly and divine, bound to the clay of the soil, yet carrying within it the essence of the gods themselves. This origin explained not only why humans existed, but also why they had a duty to serve and honor the gods. In this view, humans were not created for freedom, but for servitude. The Anunnaki had designed them as workers, as caretakers of the earth on behalf of divine beings. This idea is very different from later religious traditions that spoke of humanity as the center of creation or as beloved children of the divine. In Mesopotamian thought, the gods were supreme masters, and mankind was made to relieve them of labor. For mainstream historians, this creation myth reflects the structure of Mesopotamian society itself. Just as humans served kings and rulers, so too they imagined themselves serving the gods. But for alternative theorists, this story has taken on a very different meaning. They ask, why would the gods create humanity to do labor? Why does the myth speak of mixing blood with clay? And why do the texts so often describe the Anunnaki in physical, tangible ways, descending from the skies, giving knowledge, interacting with humans? This is where the ancient astronaut theory again comes into play. Zacharias Sitchin and others argued that these myths are not simply symbolic, but distorted memories of real events. According to this view, the Anunnaki were advanced beings from another planet who came to Earth in search of resources. To extract gold and other minerals, they required a workforce. Instead of using machines or exhausting themselves, they turned to genetic engineering. Sitchin believed that the story of clay mixed with divine essence was actually a primitive description of DNA manipulation. In his theory, the Anunnaki took early hominids and combined their genetic material with their own, creating a new species, humans, that could understand orders, perform complex tasks, and reproduce. This would explain the sudden leap in human evolution, the rise of intelligence, and the appearance of civilization in Mesopotamia almost out of nowhere. While mainstream science does not accept these claims, it is striking to notice that modern genetic research has indeed found mysteries in our DNA. Around 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged with significant differences from earlier hominids. The reason for this sudden advancement is still debated. Was it natural evolution, or was something else involved? For those who believe in the Anunnaki theory, the answer lies in these ancient texts. The myths go even further. After humanity was created, the Anunnaki became deeply involved in shaping society itself. Kingship, for example, was described as something handed down from the gods. Rulers were often portrayed as chosen by the Anunnaki, with divine right to rule over others. This gave political power a sacred foundation and tied the destiny of nations to the will of the gods. In a way, the Anunnaki were not just creators of mankind, but also architects of civilization. But creation was not without its complications. In the Atrahasis myth, humanity multiplied quickly, filling the earth with noise and chaos. The gods, disturbed by this, sent plagues and famines to control the population. When these measures failed, Enlil, the god of wind and authority, decided to wipe out humanity altogether through a great flood. Only the intervention of Enki, another god often associated with wisdom and compassion, saved a chosen man, Atrahasis, by warning him to build a boat. This story closely parallels the biblical account of Noah and the flood, suggesting a deep connection between Mesopotamian myths and later religious traditions. This brings us to another layer of the mystery. Why do so many cultures across the world share similar flood myths, creation stories, and tales of gods descending from the sky? From the Maya and the Aztecs to the Hindus and the Greeks, the themes repeat. Did all these civilizations independently invent the same kinds of stories? Or do they all trace back to a common source, perhaps even to real events involving the Anunnaki? For scholars, these parallels are usually explained as cultural diffusion or the universal human tendency to explain natural disasters and cosmic questions through myth. But for those who see the Anunnaki as alien visitors, these parallels are evidence of shared history, fragments of a forgotten time when gods walked the earth. The role of Enki and Enlil in particular reveals a deeper conflict. Enlil is often depicted as stern, authoritarian, and quick to punish, while Enki appears as a benefactor of humanity, bringing knowledge, agriculture, and survival. Could this reflect a real division among the Anunnaki themselves? Were they united in purpose, or were they divided by rivalry and different agendas toward humanity? In these stories, we see not only the origins of mankind, but also the seeds of human destiny, conflict, survival, and the struggle between freedom and servitude. The Anunnaki were not distant deities. They were active, involved, and sometimes divided over the fate of the beings they had created. As we move deeper into their mythology, the question becomes sharper. Were the Anunnaki simply mythical gods created to explain the world? Or were they remembered as real beings whose presence shaped the very birth of humanity? Enki and Enlil, the rivalry that shaped humanity. The myths of the Anunnaki are not simple tales of gods ruling in harmony. Instead, they often reveal tension, rivalry, and conflict among the divine themselves. At the very heart of Mesopotamian mythology lies one of the most important divisions, the conflict between Enki and Enlil. This rivalry was not just a quarrel between two gods. It had direct consequences for humanity, influencing myths of creation, survival, and the struggle between freedom and control. Enlil, whose name means Lord of the Air or Lord of the Command, was one of the most powerful deities in the Sumerian pantheon. He was considered a ruler among the gods, often stern, authoritative, and associated with kingship and judgment. To Enlil, humanity was noisy, restless, and often a source of trouble. In the myths, he emerges as a figure who enforces order, sometimes through harsh measures. Enki, on the other hand, was the god of water, wisdom, and creation. Known also as Ea in Akkadian tradition, Enki had a very different character. He was seen as a clever, compassionate, and cunning god who often sided with humanity. While Enlil was quick to punish, Enki was quick to protect and to provide secret knowledge. If Enlil represented the strict rule of authority, Enki represented the spark of innovation and mercy. This division can be seen most clearly in the story of the Great Flood. According to the Atrahasis myth, humanity had multiplied too quickly, and their constant noise disturbed Enlil. Angered, he sent disasters to thin the population. First drought, then famine, and eventually disease. But still, humanity survived. Finally, in his frustration, Enlil decided that humanity had become intolerable. He would destroy them completely with a flood. Yet Enki, unwilling to see humanity wiped out, took a different path. Though bound by the counsel of the gods, he found a way to secretly warn Atrahasis, a wise man. Enki instructed him to build a large boat, to take animals and family, and to prepare for the flood. When the waters came, humanity was nearly wiped out, but Atrahasis survived. After the flood, Enlil was furious to find humans had lived. Enki, however, persuaded him to accept humanity's survival, and together they agreed on new measures to limit human growth, such as mortality and infertility. This myth does more than explain a natural disaster. It paints a picture of two forces that have shaped human destiny since the beginning: authority and mercy, control and freedom. Enlil sought order at all costs, even if it meant destruction. Enki sought to preserve life, even if it meant bending the rules of divine authority. In a way, humanity itself seems caught between these two powers. From the perspective of ancient astronaut theory, this conflict has even deeper meaning. If the Anunnaki were truly advanced beings from another world, then Enlil and Enki might represent rival factions among them. Enlil's faction could have seen humanity as nothing more than tools, creatures designed for labor and not meant to evolve beyond servitude. Enki's faction, on the other hand, may have viewed humanity as more than slaves, as beings with potential to grow, learn, and perhaps even share in the knowledge of the gods. This division may explain why, in so many myths, humanity receives forbidden knowledge. Enki was often described as the one who gave skills such as agriculture, irrigation, and writing to humans. In some accounts, he even shared the secrets of magic, medicine, and wisdom. For mainstream scholars, this reflects the way Mesopotamian society credited divine inspiration for the rise of civilization. But for those who see the Anunnaki as real beings, it suggests something more concrete: the deliberate sharing of technology and science with early humans. Of course, this also echoes stories from other cultures. In Greek mythology, Prometheus defied the gods by giving fire to humanity. In the book of Genesis, the serpent in Eden tempted humans to gain knowledge that was forbidden. Again and again, myths around the world repeat this theme. A figure, often at odds with higher authority, gives humanity the gift of knowledge, and in doing so, changes human destiny forever. Could Enki have been the Mesopotamian version of this archetype, the bringer of wisdom, the rebel against strict authority, and perhaps even the true ally of mankind? Meanwhile, Enlil's role as the strict master also resonates with stories of jealous or wrathful gods who punish humanity for stepping out of place. To him, humans were noisy, chaotic, and dangerous when left unchecked. This perspective might also reflect the viewpoint of those Anunnaki who wanted to maintain dominance and control. In this reading, Enlil becomes a symbol of the forces that hold humanity back, while Enki represents the forces that encourage growth and freedom. The rivalry between the two also had political significance in ancient Mesopotamia. Cities like Nippur, which worshipped Enlil as their chief deity, emphasized order, law, and obedience. Other centers like Eridu, where Enki was honored, celebrated creativity, water, and wisdom. This rivalry of gods mirrored rivalries between city-states, each aligning themselves with a divine patron who embodied their values and ambitions. In this sense, the myths of Enki and Enlil were not only cosmic stories, but also reflections of the human world. Yet the most striking element of their conflict is how directly it involved humanity. Unlike distant deities of later traditions, the Anunnaki did not simply create and then vanish. They were portrayed as deeply entangled in human affairs, deciding survival, shaping civilization, and even determining human lifespan. This closeness blurs the line between myth and history. Were these stories symbolic, or are they preserved memories of beings who really walked among the first civilizations? The flood myth itself suggests more than just a natural disaster. If we read it symbolically, it is about renewal, about cleansing the earth of chaos. But if we read it literally, it could reflect a real cataclysm, an actual flood remembered by ancient people. Geological evidence shows that large-scale flooding events did occur in the Mesopotamian region thousands of years ago. Could one of these events have been the inspiration behind the myths? And could the intervention of a figure like Enki reflect real warnings, guidance, or technological help offered by beings remembered as gods? The deeper we go into these stories, the more we see humanity's fate tied to the struggles of the Anunnaki themselves. Whether as gods or as alien overseers, Enki and Enlil embody two paths for humankind: to be controlled or to be liberated, to remain servants or to grow beyond the purpose for which they were created. This tension would echo not only through Mesopotamian myth, but through countless other traditions across the world. And so, the rivalry of Enki and Enlil is not just an old story carved into clay tablets. It is the reflection of a larger question that still lingers today. Are we meant to remain bound by the conditions set for us? Or are we destined to rise beyond them, guided by knowledge, creativity, and rebellion against authority? This conflict, both divine and human, sets the stage for the continuing mystery of the Anunnaki. As humanity grew, built cities, and formed kingdoms, the role of the Anunnaki did not fade. Instead, it became even more central, woven into the very idea of kingship, power and the destiny of nations. The Anunnaki and the gift of kingship. As humanity survived floods, plagues, and the watchful eyes of rival gods, one thing became clear in Mesopotamian mythology. The Anunnaki did not simply create humans and then leave them to their own fate. Instead, they became deeply entwined in shaping how human societies were organized. At the very center of this relationship stood the concept of kingship, the belief that rulers were not merely men, but chosen representatives of the gods themselves. In the Sumerian worldview, kingship was not a human invention. It was described as something sent down from heaven. In texts like the Sumerian king list, which records dynasties stretching back thousands of years, this idea is emphasized repeatedly. The list begins with legendary kings who supposedly reigned for impossibly long periods, thousands of years each. According to the tablets, before the flood, kingship descended from heaven and was given to the city of Eridu. After the flood, it moved from city to city, as if the gods themselves were choosing where power should reside. This idea transformed rulers into more than political leaders. They were guardians of divine order, intermediaries between humans and the Anunnaki. By granting kingship, the gods gave structure to human society, establishing not only authority, but also law, ritual, and the justification for hierarchy. To obey the king was to obey the gods who had appointed him. Take the city of Uruk, one of the most famous centers of Sumerian civilization. Its legendary king Gilgamesh was described as two-thirds divine and one-third human. His semi-divine nature symbolized the close link between humanity and the Anunnaki. Gilgamesh's epic adventures, his search for immortality, his friendship with Enkidu, and his encounters with the gods were more than heroic tales. They were reflections of the idea that rulers were touched by divinity, set apart from ordinary men, yet still bound by the laws of fate established by the gods. But why did the Anunnaki care so much about kingship? Why not let humanity govern itself? From a mythological perspective, kingship ensured order. It prevented chaos and rebellion against the gods. From the viewpoint of ancient astronaut theorists, however, kingship may have served another purpose: control. If the Anunnaki had created humanity as workers, then placing chosen rulers in power allowed them to manage human society indirectly. Instead of ruling every person directly, they ruled through kings, those who were loyal to their cause and claimed divine backing for their authority. This might also explain why so many rulers throughout history claimed descent from the gods. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond, kings and pharaohs did not present themselves as ordinary men. They were divine sons, chosen shepherds, or even gods in human form. These claims might have been symbolic, or they might have been echoes of something real, if indeed the Anunnaki interbred with humans or bestowed divine bloodlines, as some myths suggest. The figure of Enmerkar, another ancient king of Uruk, is a good example. In myth, Enmerkar was said to have built the first great temple to honor Inanna, the goddess of love and war. He was also remembered for demanding tribute from neighboring peoples, claiming divine authority to do so. His reign reflects the close relationship between temple, kingship, and divine will, a trinity that shaped the structure of Mesopotamian civilization. Temples themselves, the ziggurats that towered over Mesopotamian cities, were seen as the meeting points between gods and humans. At the top, priests performed rituals to honor the Anunnaki, while at the base, kings proclaimed their rule as sanctioned by these same deities. Some have speculated that these structures were more than temples, that they might have been platforms, perhaps even landing sites, for the sky gods who descended from heaven. Mainstream scholars see them as religious centers, but their scale and purpose continue to intrigue those who search for hidden meanings. The Sumerian king list also tells us something remarkable. It speaks of kingship existing before the Great Flood, continuing after it, and being carefully passed from one city to another. This suggests that kingship was seen not just as political power, but as a divine gift that could be withdrawn or reassigned. When cities rose to greatness, they were believed to have been blessed by the Anunnaki. When they fell, it was seen as the gods turning their favor elsewhere. This cycle mirrors the rise and fall of empires throughout history. Even in later Mesopotamian cultures, such as Babylon and Assyria, rulers always tied their legitimacy to the gods. Hammurabi, the famous Babylonian king, declared in his law code that his right to rule came from the gods Anu and Enlil. The Assyrian kings carved inscriptions describing themselves as chosen by Ashur, their chief deity. In every case, kingship was inseparable from divine sanction. For those who see the Anunnaki as alien visitors, this pattern suggests a long-term strategy of governance. By selecting rulers, teaching them laws, and granting them authority, the Anunnaki could guide human civilization while remaining behind the scenes. Kings became managers, priests became intermediaries, and the gods, or perhaps alien overlords, remained the unseen power behind the throne. But kingship was not always a blessing. It also brought war, conquest, and oppression. If the Anunnaki truly guided rulers, then were they responsible for the endless cycles of bloodshed that marked Mesopotamian history? Or were human kings simply using the names of the gods to justify their ambitions? These questions remain open, leaving us to wonder how much of human history was shaped by divine command, and how much by human greed. There is another angle to consider. In some traditions, kingship was tied not only to power, but also to knowledge. Rulers were sometimes described as receiving secret wisdom from the gods, knowledge of writing, astronomy, and even the movements of the stars. The Sumerians were among the first to chart constellations, to record eclipses, and to develop mathematics. Could this knowledge have been passed down by the Anunnaki through their chosen kings and priests? If so, kingship was not merely political control. It was also the gateway for transferring advanced knowledge to humanity. By channeling wisdom through a select few, the Anunnaki ensured that civilization advanced in a controlled, deliberate way. Too much knowledge too quickly could cause chaos. But given slowly through rulers and temples, it could shape society without breaking it. This also fits with the broader theme of Enki versus Enlil. Enlil, as the god of authority, supported the idea of kingship as strict control, while Enki may have used it as a way to subtly empower humanity with knowledge. Thus, even within kingship, the rivalry of the gods continued to play out. The role of the Anunnaki in kingship reveals a crucial truth. The gods of Mesopotamia were not distant beings, but active participants in human civilization. Whether as symbols of divine order or as actual alien overseers, they were remembered as the ones who shaped the very concept of leadership, law, and as kings ruled in their name, humanity continued to grow, building cities, temples, and empires. Yet the myths hint at something more, that even as humans looked up to their kings as divine, the Anunnaki themselves were never far away, watching, guiding, and perhaps even manipulating the course of history. The possible alien connection. Were the Anunnaki visitors from the stars? As we move deeper into the story of the Anunnaki, we now step into the most controversial and fascinating part of the mystery. The possibility that these gods of ancient Mesopotamia were not just mythical beings, but actual extraterrestrial visitors from another world. This is where archaeology, mythology, and modern speculation collide. For centuries, the Sumerians' descriptions of the Anunnaki were read as religious or symbolic myths. But in the 20th century, new interpretations emerged, most famously from author Zecharia Sitchin, who argued that the Anunnaki were in fact alien beings from a distant planet called Nibiru. According to Sitchin, the ancient texts that described the Anunnaki could be read literally, not as poetic myths, but as historical accounts of contact between humans and a technologically advanced civilization. Let us carefully unpack this possibility, tracing how the alien theory developed, what the Sumerians wrote, and how modern researchers interpret it. The concept of Nibiru. The idea of the planet Nibiru comes mainly from Sitchin's interpretations of Sumerian and Akkadian texts. He claimed that the Mesopotamians knew of a 12th celestial body in our solar system, what he called the 12th planet, if you count the sun and moon alongside the other planets. According to him, Nibiru has an extremely long elliptical orbit, taking about 3,600 years to circle the sun. This wandering world, he suggested, periodically comes close to Earth, and it was from Nibiru that the Anunnaki descended in ancient times. For the Sumerians, the gods came from the heavens. And for Sitchin, this was not a metaphor. It meant quite literally from another planet. Critics argue that the texts do not explicitly mention such a planet, and that Sitchin's translations stretch beyond accepted academic scholarship. Yet, the theory has captured the imagination of millions because it seems to align strangely well with some ancient descriptions of the Anunnaki. The arrival of the Anunnaki. In this alien interpretation, the Anunnaki arrived on Earth thousands of years ago. Sumerian mythology often describes them as descending from the sky in fiery chariots or radiant boats. While mainstream scholars see this as poetic imagery, some researchers ask whether these could have been descriptions of spacecraft witnessed by early humans who lacked the vocabulary to describe advanced technology. Sitchin and others suggested that the Anunnaki came to Earth in search of resources, particularly gold. Gold, they claimed, was essential for the survival of their planet, possibly used to repair or stabilize Nibiru's atmosphere. Ancient myths do repeatedly mention the gods mining or extracting resources, and humans being created to assist in this labor. Creation of humanity. This leads to one of the boldest claims of the alien theory, that the Anunnaki created modern humans through genetic engineering. In Sumerian mythology, the god Enki is said to have fashioned mankind from clay, mixing it with the blood or essence of a god. Traditionally, this is seen as a symbolic story of divine creation, but some interpret it literally, suggesting that the essence refers to DNA. According to this idea, the Anunnaki took early hominids that existed on Earth and altered them genetically, giving rise to Homo sapiens. The reason? To create a labor force. The Anunnaki did not want to toil in the mines themselves, so they engineered a species intelligent enough to follow commands, but dependent enough to remain under their control. This echoes through Sumerian stories, where humans are described as servants of the gods. Gods or masters. If we view the Anunnaki as extraterrestrial beings, then their role as gods becomes clearer. Early humans, encountering beings with advanced knowledge, flight, and technology, would have naturally worshipped them. The shining helmets, the powerful weapons, and the ability to move through the sky would have seemed divine to a civilization just learning how to farm and build cities. This raises an important question. Were the myths of gods not stories of faith, but memories of real encounters with advanced visitors? Evidence in ancient texts and images. Supporters of the alien theory point to the abundance of ancient Mesopotamian art showing winged beings, figures holding strange objects, or gods in flying discs. One recurring image shows gods with what look like wristwatches or small devices strapped to their arms, details that spark curiosity. Cylinder seals, tiny engraved stones used to roll images onto clay, sometimes depict scenes that have been interpreted as solar systems or celestial maps. While scholars caution against overinterpretation, the images fuel the idea that the Sumerians had knowledge far beyond what their time should have allowed. The genetic question. The leap from myth to genetics is bold, but intriguing. Modern science has shown that Homo sapiens appeared relatively suddenly compared to other evolutionary paths, with a dramatic increase in brain size and complexity. Mainstream science attributes this to natural evolution and environmental pressures, but the alien theory suggests a helping hand. If the Anunnaki truly spliced their own DNA with that of early humans, it could explain why ancient myths stress that humanity carries a divine spark. It also aligns with the recurring story across cultures of gods teaching humanity agriculture, writing, and astronomy, knowledge that seems to appear fully formed in Sumerian civilization. The departure of the Anunnaki. One more element in the theory is the mysterious departure of the Anunnaki. If they were truly here, why did they leave? Some myths describe wars among the gods, floods, and disasters that forced them to withdraw. Others say they simply completed their mission and returned to the heavens, promising to come back. This idea that humanity's gods will one day return from the stars echoes in countless traditions around the world, from the Sumerians to the Maya. Could this be a universal memory of ancient extraterrestrial contact? Skepticism and debate. Of course, the alien interpretation is heavily debated. Mainstream historians argue that Sitchin's translations of Sumerian are flawed and that the texts do not truly describe aliens or distant planets. They stress that myths are symbolic, not literal records. Yet, the persistence of this theory in modern culture shows that it resonates deeply with human curiosity. People wonder, how did the Sumerians, 6,000 years ago, develop such advanced knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, and mathematics? Was it truly all their own invention, or was there guidance from somewhere or someone else? A mystery that endures. The idea of the Anunnaki as alien gods challenges everything we think we know about history. If true, it means that our origins are not purely earthly, but cosmic. It would mean that humanity itself is part of a much larger galactic story, an experiment or a creation guided by beings far beyond our understanding. Whether myth, metaphor, or memory of real encounters, the Anunnaki continue to fascinate because they sit at the intersection of two questions. Who were the first gods? And who are we really? The spread of the Anunnaki story, from Mesopotamia to the world. By now, we've seen how the Anunnaki were described in Mesopotamian texts, and how some modern interpretations view them as possible extraterrestrial visitors. But here's another question to consider. If the Anunnaki were such a central part of Mesopotamian civilization, why do echoes of their story seem to appear in cultures far beyond the Tigris and Euphrates rivers? This is where the mystery deepens. The Anunnaki story did not stay confined to Sumer or Akkad. Over time, as Mesopotamian power shifted to Babylon and Assyria, their myths evolved, and later civilizations inherited, adapted, or reimagined the role of these gods. And when we look even further across the ancient world, we find surprising similarities. Gods descending from the sky, civilizers who bring knowledge, beings who demand worship, and creators who fashion mankind for service. So let us trace how the Anunnaki story spread, first within Mesopotamia itself, then into neighboring lands, and possibly even across the globe. From Sumer to Akkad, the shifting identity of the Anunnaki. When Sumer declined and the Akkadian Empire rose to power, the Anunnaki didn't vanish. Instead, their identities began to shift. In Akkadian and Babylonian traditions, the Anunnaki were sometimes described not as great sky gods, but as judges of the underworld. This duality, gods of heaven in one context and gods of the underworld in another, shows how myths transform over time. In some Akkadian stories, the Anunnaki sit in judgment over the dead. Yet in other texts, they are still powerful beings who dwell with the high gods, especially with Anu, the father god. The takeaway? The Anunnaki weren't a fixed concept. They evolved as cultures changed, but they always retained a sense of immense power and authority. The Babylonian transformation, Marduk and the 50 names. When Babylon became the center of power, the mythological spotlight shifted again. In the famous Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, the young god Marduk rises to supremacy after defeating the chaos goddess Tiamat. After his victory, the other gods grant him 50 names, a sign of ultimate authority. Here's the fascinating part. Many scholars believe that these 50 names represent the absorption of older gods' powers, including those of the Anunnaki. In other words, the Anunnaki's roles were folded into the rising Babylonian pantheon, their once great prominence restructured under Marduk's rule. This reflects not only a mythological change, but also a political one. Just as Babylon replaced Sumer as the dominant power, Marduk replaced Enlil, Enki, and the Anunnaki as the central focus of worship. Assyria, the warrior gods. Later, in Assyria, the gods took on an even harsher and more militaristic tone. Assyrian kings often depicted themselves as chosen by the gods to wage war and expand empires. The older stories of the Anunnaki still lingered, but their imagery was increasingly tied to judgment, the underworld, and cosmic order rather than day-to-day human affairs. Still, the memory of the Anunnaki endured, woven into the tapestry of Mesopotamian religion, even as empires rose and fell. Beyond Mesopotamia, parallels in other cultures. Now we move to the more mysterious question. Why do so many other ancient civilizations have myths that sound eerily similar to the Anunnaki? Egyptian gods. In Egypt, deities like Osiris, Isis, and Ra were said to have descended from the heavens, bringing knowledge of agriculture, laws, and writing. The story of Thoth, the god of wisdom, mirrors Enki's role in teaching humans advanced skills. Greek myths. The Greek Titans and Olympian gods also bear striking similarities. The Titans were primordial beings who ruled before being overthrown by Zeus and the Olympians. Just as the Anunnaki were sometimes linked to underworld judgment, the Titans were cast into Tartarus, a deep abyss beneath the earth. Mesoamerican myths. In Mayan and Aztec traditions, gods like Quetzalcoatl were said to have descended from the sky, created humanity, and promised to return. This theme of sky gods who will return is almost identical to some Sumerian traditions about the Anunnaki. India's Vedic texts. In Hindu mythology, beings called the Devas and Asuras waged cosmic battles, descended to Earth, and interacted with humans. They too had flying vehicles known as Vimanas, which some modern researchers compare to spacecraft. Across continents separated by oceans, cultures told stories of sky beings who shaped humanity. Was this simply coincidence? Shared human imagination? Or could it point to a common origin? Perhaps real events remembered differently by different peoples? The flood myths. A shared memory? Another striking similarity is the story of the Great Flood. In Mesopotamian myths, the gods, sometimes including the Anunnaki, send a flood to destroy humanity. The hero Atrahasis, or in later versions Utnapishtim, builds a boat and survives, much like Noah in the Bible. But the flood myth is not unique to Mesopotamia. Versions of it appear in Greek, Indian, Chinese, and even Native American traditions. Could it be that ancient civilizations across the world remembered a real catastrophic event, possibly a natural disaster witnessed by early humans, that was tied to the will of their gods? For those who support the alien Anunnaki theory, the flood is sometimes interpreted as an attempt by these beings to reset or control humanity. For traditional scholars, it's more likely a shared myth born from the memory of ancient floods in river valley civilizations. Either way, the pattern is too striking to ignore. Did the Anunnaki travel the world? One of the boldest ideas is that the Anunnaki, or beings like them, traveled far beyond Mesopotamia. Supporters of this theory point to monumental architecture around the world that seems far too advanced for its time. The pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the megaliths of Stonehenge, the colossal stone heads of the Olmec civilization in Mesoamerica, the precise stonework of Machu Picchu in Peru. While mainstream archaeology explains these as the product of human ingenuity, alternative researchers argue that humanity may have had outside help. If the Anunnaki were truly advanced beings, they could have shared technology or knowledge across continents, the universal archetype of sky gods. At the heart of it all is this universal archetype. Beings from the sky who descend to Earth, create or shape humanity, teach civilization, and then withdraw. The Sumerians called them Anunnaki. Other cultures had different names, but the pattern is there. Is it simply that humans everywhere looked up at the stars and dreamed? Or is it possible that something real inspired these myths, something or someone that visited Earth in humanity's earliest days? A continuing puzzle. The spread of the Anunnaki story shows us one undeniable truth. The Sumerians were not alone in imagining powerful beings descending from above. Whether purely symbolic or based on actual encounters, the echoes of the Anunnaki resonate in myths from Egypt to Greece, from India to the Americas. It is this interconnectedness that makes the Anunnaki mystery so compelling. Their story does not sit quietly in ancient tablets. It seems to ripple outward, touching cultures across time and space. Rediscovering the Anunnaki, modern obsession, books, and the birth of a mythic industry. As we move from ancient tablets and ziggurats into the modern world, the Anunnaki shift from pages of dusty scholarship into the bright, often chaotic light of popular culture. What began as cuneiform inscriptions in Mesopotamia has become a global phenomenon. a story told and retold in books, documentaries, podcasts, and millions of YouTube videos. In this chapter of the saga, we examine how the Anunnaki re-entered public imagination, who shaped that revival, and why the story keeps growing stronger in our time. The modern rediscovery of Sumerian culture started with the decipherment of cuneiform in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Suddenly, scholars could read the words of people who had lived thousands of years ago. As translations of creation myths, king lists, and epic poems reached wider audiences, the raw material for the Anunnaki story became available. But it was in the second half of the 20th century that these ancient names were given new life and new meanings beyond academic circles. A handful of very influential books transformed the Anunnaki from academic footnotes into the central players of a sweeping alternative history. Writers who read the Sumerian myths through different lenses argued that these were not symbolic tales, but literal accounts of extraterrestrial visitors. Their ideas were dramatic and easily digestible. Gods who traveled the stars, advanced knowledge handed down to humans, and a hidden chapter of human origins that mainstream history had ignored or suppressed. These narratives offered a single clean explanation for several puzzling facts. Sudden jumps in technology, similar myths from distant cultures, and enigmatic ancient artwork. With the arrival of cable television, home video, and later the internet, these theories found a far larger stage. Documentaries, often blending interviews, dramatic reenactments, and evocative visuals, popularized the idea that ancient civilizations had direct contact with non-human intelligences. Television series that mixed archaeology with speculation captured large audiences hungry for mystery. Then came the internet era. Forums, blogs, and YouTube unlocked exponential reach. A single persuasive video or charismatic channel could turn curious viewers into devoted followers overnight. The Anunnaki became a brand in the marketplace of wonder. But why did the Anunnaki specifically catch on so well? There are a few psychological and cultural reasons. First, the story answers deep human questions in a tidy way. Origin mysteries, why we are here, who taught us to farm, who gave us laws, are uncomfortable topics. The Anunnaki framework supplies an origin story that is both grand and simple. Advanced beings taught humans everything. Second, the narrative is cinematic. Sky gods, epic floods, secret knowledge, and spacefaring visitors are elements that translate perfectly to visual media. Third, the story gives people a sense of being privy to a hidden truth, an intoxicating idea in an era when distrust of institutions and expertise runs high. Alongside popularizers, several recognizable names became associated with the Anunnaki revival. Their books and interviews circulated widely, often blurring the line between careful translation and imaginative reconstruction. These authors assembled details from myths, archaeological finds, and astronomical speculation into coherent narratives that appealed to people who felt conventional history didn't tell the whole story. Whether readers immediately accepted every claim or not, the effect was to cement the Anunnaki in modern myth. Unsurprisingly, this new popularity created an industry. Conferences, merchandise, web shows, and whole channels sprung up around ancient astronaut themes. Some creators aimed for entertainment, others for evangelism. Podcasts explored every angle: ancient astronauts, suppressed histories, government cover-ups, and prophecy. Social media amplified voices on both sides, producing communities that defend or attack Anunnaki ideas with equal passion. But the surge in popularity also brought rigorous pushback. Professional historians, linguists, and archaeologists criticized many modern claims as speculative or based on flawed translations. Scholarly rebuttals pointed out that myths are symbolic, that ancient imagery can be misread when pulled out of cultural context, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Evidence that, as of now, remains lacking for literal interpretations of aliens in antiquity. Academic critiques emphasize process, careful excavation, peer review, and cautious interpretation, rather than drawing sweeping conclusions from isolated phrases or ambiguous images. This debate between mainstream scholarship and alternative theorists boils down to different rules of evidence and different ways of storytelling. Academics prioritize context, method, and comparably weighted explanations. Alternative theorists often prioritize pattern recognition, bold inference, and narrative coherence. To many curious people, the bold narratives are simply more fun to follow. They offer a story that feels like a detective thriller rather than a slow-moving academic paper. Popular culture took the Anunnaki myth and ran with it. Movies, TV shows, video games, and novels borrowed motifs. Star gods who intervene in human affairs. Lost technologies hidden beneath deserts. Heroes searching for ancient arsenals of power. Even when the Anunnaki aren't named explicitly, their influence can be found in countless sci-fi plots and fantasy epics. The imagery of winged beings, horned helmets, and grand ziggurats has been reworked into everything from blockbuster films to indie comic books. There's also a spiritual and political dimension. Some modern spiritual movements have incorporated Anunnaki myths into cosmologies that reframe human purpose and destiny. For authoritarian fringe groups, the story of powerful outsiders who grant authority has sometimes been twisted into claims about lineage and divine right. The adaptability of the Anunnaki narrative, its malleability across entertainment, spirituality, and politics, is one reason it persists. Then there is the question of motive. Why do people prefer a cosmic origin to more mundane explanations? For some, the Anunnaki thesis is empowering. It makes humanity part of a larger cosmic plan. For others, it offers a scapegoat for historical mysteries, a convenient explanation for gaps in archaeological records. In an age where knowledge is abundant but certainty is rare, such explanations can feel reassuring. Still, there is a productive middle ground that few mainstream voices explore, using the Anunnaki story as a lens to reflect on the real achievements of ancient peoples. Even if one rejects literal alien interpretations, the myths themselves are extraordinary cultural artifacts. They reveal how the earliest urban societies thought about power, technology, fate, and the cosmos. By studying these texts honestly, respecting their poetry, ritual meaning, and historical roots, we can honor both the ingenuity of ancient peoples and the imagination of modern storytellers. Finally, the modern Anunnaki phenomenon teaches us something important about history itself, that past and present continually reshape one another. Ancient myths inspire modern tales and modern concerns about technology, authority, and identity. Rewrite ancient motifs to suit new anxieties. The Anunnaki are not just relics of Sumerian belief. They are living symbols that people use to ask the same old questions. Who made us? Who watches over us? Who holds the keys to knowledge? As the debate continues, as new discoveries emerge, and as media reshapes public imagination, the Anunnaki will likely remain a cultural touchstone, an idea that occupies a strange middle place between scholarship and speculation, archaeology and myth, science and story. The next and final part of our journey will explore the evidence, the critiques, and what the future might hold for the Anunnaki mystery. Evidence, controversy, and the unfinished mystery of the Anunnaki. We have walked together through ancient Mesopotamia, deciphered myths, examined theories of alien gods, and traced how the Anunnaki became a modern cultural phenomenon. But now, at the end of this long journey, one question lingers. What is the truth? Were the Anunnaki real beings from another world? Or are they simply the reflections of human imagination? Symbols of power, hope, and fear? Let us weigh the evidence, the criticisms, and the possibilities before reaching our conclusion. The archaeological evidence. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of tablets from Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. These clay tablets are remarkable records containing stories, hymns, and administrative texts. They provide one of the most detailed windows into any ancient civilization. But what do they actually say? The truth is that the tablets themselves describe the Anunnaki as gods, children of Anu, linked to the heavens, often serving roles in divine councils or underworld judgment. They appear in creation myths, flood stories, and rituals. Nowhere do these texts unambiguously say aliens or space travelers. The alien theory emerges from reinterpretation, from reading mythological language, literally rather than symbolically. This does not mean the theory is impossible, but it means the tablets alone cannot prove it. What they prove without doubt is that the Sumerians believed in powerful beings who shaped their world. The case for symbolism. Mainstream historians and linguists argue that the Anunnaki were symbolic figures, representing forces of nature, cosmic order, or political authority. Myths of gods descending from the sky, for example, can be read as metaphors for rain and fertility, or as stories legitimizing kingship by claiming divine support. The creation of humans from clay mixed with divine essence could be seen not as genetic engineering, but as a poetic metaphor. Humans are shaped from the earth, yet bear the spark of consciousness that links them to the divine. This view reminds us that myths are not lies. They are deep truths told in symbolic form. They were never meant to be literal science, but rather spiritual maps for understanding the human condition. The alien interpretation. On the other side, the ancient astronaut theory refuses to be silenced. Supporters argue that myths should be taken at face value, that when the Sumerians said their gods came from the heavens, they meant it literally. The sudden rise of Sumerian civilization is often pointed to as evidence. How could humans, barely emerging from Stone Age farming villages, suddenly invent writing, astronomy, advanced mathematics, and monumental architecture? Was there a missing ingredient? A spark given by outside visitors? Supporters also highlight similarities across global myths. Gods descending, creating humanity, and then departing. To them, this is too consistent to be coincidence. The evidence may not convince mainstream scholars, but it continues to inspire millions. For many, the alien interpretation feels truer to the scope of the mystery than symbolic explanations. The scientific lens. Modern genetics and archaeology complicate the picture further. On one hand, the fossil record shows that Homo sapiens evolved naturally from earlier hominids, without a sudden alien intervention. On the other hand, the Great Leap Forward, the sudden burst of symbolic thought, language, and culture around 50,000 years ago, remains puzzling. Why did humanity accelerate so rapidly? Science does not need aliens to explain it, but the gap leaves room for speculation, and speculation is where myths thrive. The cultural role of the Anunnaki. Perhaps the greatest evidence of the Anunnaki's power lies not in gold mines or genetic codes, but in their enduring grip on the human imagination. For the Sumerians, the Anunnaki explained their place in the cosmos. For the Babylonians, they became symbols of divine judgment. For modern seekers, they are keys to a hidden history, a doorway to imagining humanity's role in a vast galactic community. This flexibility, the ability to mean different things in different times, is the true strength of the Anunnaki myth. Whether gods or aliens, they give us a way to grapple with the biggest questions. Where did we come from? Who are we? Are we alone? Controversy and balance. The debate over the Anunnaki reveals as much about us as it does about them. On one side, scholars insist on evidence, context, and cautious interpretation. On the other side, alternative researchers chase bold theories that inspire wonder, even if they cannot be proven. Neither side is entirely wrong. Science is right to demand evidence, but imagination is also right to dream beyond the evidence. Together, these approaches keep the Anunnaki alive as both history and possibility. The mystery endures. So where does that leave us? The Anunnaki may never be proven as alien visitors. The tablets do not confirm spacecraft or genetic laboratories. Yet the myths are too strange, too detailed, and too universal to dismiss as mere fantasy. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Maybe the Anunnaki were gods in the way the ancients understood gods, beings who embodied forces greater than themselves. Or maybe, just maybe, they were real visitors whose memory has been preserved in stories across millennia. Either way, the Anunnaki stand as one of humanity's greatest mysteries, a reminder that the past is never fully closed, and that the line between myth and history is thinner than we think. The final reflection. And so, our journey through the Anunnaki mystery comes to an end. From the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia to modern debates on alien gods, we have explored every angle of this ancient enigma. Were the Anunnaki simply mythical gods, powerful symbols of divine authority? Or were they alien beings, visitors from the stars who shaped humanity's destiny? The evidence is not enough to decide, but perhaps that is the point. The Anunnaki endure not because we can prove them, but because they invite us to wonder. They force us to ask questions too large for easy answers. They remind us that human history is a vast ocean, and we have only glimpsed the surface. So, the next time you look up at the night sky, remember the ancient Sumerians who once told stories of gods descending from the heavens. Whether myth or memory, their voices still echo across thousands of years, calling us to look upward and ask, who are we? Where did we come from? And who might still be out there, watching the cradle of humanity from the stars? The mystery of the Anunnaki remains uncovered, but never fully explained. And perhaps that is why it will never fade.